When I was 14, I ran away from home after my parents said I was nothing but dead weight. I slept in shelters, worked any job I could find, and built my life alone. I never looked back until last week, when they showed up at my office, begging me to help save the family house. I leaned back in my chair, looked them dead in the eye, and said just one word. I, 39M, was in the middle of reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant knocked and told me two people were in the lobby claiming to be my parents. The words hit me like cold water. I hadn't seen them in 25 years. Not since the night I walked out with nothing but a backpack and the clothes on my back. My assistant asked if I wanted her to send them away. I sat there for a moment, staring at the spreadsheet on my screen, numbers blurring into nothing. Part of me wanted to say yes. The bigger part wanted to see what desperation looked like on their faces. I told her to give me 5 minutes, then send them in. Those 5 minutes felt like hours. Memories I'd buried deep came flooding back. I was 14 again, standing in our cramped kitchen while my father yelled about how much I cost them. How I ate their food, used their electricity, took up space. My mother stood beside him, arms crossed, nodding along. I remembered asking if they even wanted me there anymore. My father's response was burned into my brain forever. He said I was nothing but dead weight, dragging them down, and maybe everyone would be better off if I just left. So I did. That first night, I slept under a bridge, shivering despite it being summer. I was terrified, but I was also free. Over the next few weeks, I bounced between shelters, learning quickly which ones were safe and which ones weren't. I lied about my age, said I was 16, and picked up work wherever I could find it. Dishwashing, sweeping floors, hauling trash. Nobody asked too many questions when you were willing to work hard for cash under the table. The door opened, pulling me back to the present. They walked in, older and smaller than I remembered. My father's hair was completely gray, his shoulders hunched. My mother looked frail, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her purse. They both stopped when they saw me, eyes widening. I suppose they weren't expecting the scrawny kid they threw out to be sitting in a corner office wearing a tailored suit. I didn't stand, didn't offer them seats, just waited. My father started talking first, his voice uncertain. He said they'd been trying to find me for years, that they'd hired investigators, checked databases, contacted old schools. I almost laughed. They hadn't tried very hard. I'd been in the same city the whole time. My mother chimed in, tears already forming. She said they'd made mistakes, that they were young and stupid, that they'd been going through a rough patch financially and took it out on me. She said not a day went by that she didn't regret what they'd said. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled, and asked them what they wanted. The question seemed to catch them off guard. My father glanced at my mother, then back at me. He said they wouldn't have come if they weren't desperate. The family house, the one I'd grown up in, was being foreclosed on. They'd fallen behind on payments after my father lost his job 3 years ago. They'd burned through their savings, maxed out credit cards, borrowed from everyone they knew. The bank had given them 30 days. My mother jumped in, talking faster now. She said the house had been in the family for 2 generations, that it held so many memories, that losing it would destroy them. She said they needed $60,000 to catch up on the missed payments and late fees. Then came the part that made my jaw clench. My father said they knew I'd done well for myself, that clearly I had money, that family was supposed to help family. My mother added that surely I could understand, that I could forgive them, that blood was thicker than water. I let the silence stretch, watched them squirm. My father shifted his weight, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. My mother clutched her purse tighter, knuckles white. I told them I remembered being 14, remembered every word they'd said that night. My mother started to interrupt, to offer more excuses, but I held up a hand. I said I remembered sleeping in shelters where grown men stared at me like I was prey. Remembered working 12-hour shifts washing dishes, my hands raw and bleeding. Remembered eating from dumpsters behind restaurants when I couldn't afford food. My father tried to speak, saying they were sorry, that they'd changed. I cut him off. I told them about the winter I nearly froze to death because the shelter was full and I had nowhere to go. About the time I got jumped and robbed of the $200 I'd saved, setting me back months. About applying for proper jobs at 16 with no address, no references, no high school diploma, and being turned away everywhere. My mother was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks. She said they knew they'd failed me, that they couldn't take it back, but that they were still my parents, that they loved me. I asked her where that love was when I was 14 and terrified. Where it was during the holidays I spent alone. Where it was on my 18th birthday when I finally got my GED, or my 21st when I landed my first real job, or my 30th when I started my own company. My father's face was red. He said they'd made mistakes, but that I'd clearly survived just fine. That I'd done well for myself. The implication was clear. I didn't really suffer that much if I ended up here. Something cold settled in my chest. I stood up then, walked around my desk, and stopped a few feet from them. I told them they were right about one thing. I had done well for myself. I'd worked 70-hour weeks for years. I'd sacrificed relationships, health, sleep. I'd clawed my way up from nothing while they sat in their family house. The same house they were now begging me to save. My mother reached out like she was going to touch my arm. I stepped back. She asked if I was really going to let them lose their home. If I was really that cruel. I felt a laugh bubble up, bitter and sharp. I told them I'd learned cruelty from the best. That they'd taught me exactly how much family meant when things got hard. My father's expression shifted then, from desperate to angry. He said I was being vindictive. That I was punishing them for mistakes they made decades ago. That I was no better than they were if I let them suffer when I could help. I told him he was absolutely right. I was being vindictive. But unlike them, I'd earned it. Every cent I had came from my own sweat and blood. They'd contributed nothing to my life except trauma and a masterclass in what not to become. My mother collapsed into one of the chairs I hadn't offered them, sobbing. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. That I'd become so hard, so cold. She asked what happened to the sweet boy she'd raised. I told her that boy died on the streets at 14. What stood before her now was what survived. My father pulled himself up straighter, trying to salvage some dignity. He said they'd make it without me, that they'd find another way. But his eyes were hollow. We all knew there was no other way. That's why they were here. I walked back to my desk and sat down, picked up a pen and tapped it against my notepad. Asked them if they remembered what they called me that night. Deadweight. I told them the irony wasn't lost on me that they were now the ones weighing others down. My mother begged one more time. Said she was sorry, that she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me if I just helped them this once. She swore they'd pay me back, though we both knew they never would. She said I was their only hope. I looked at them both. These people who were supposed to protect me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. These strangers who shared my DNA and nothing else. My father asked what I was going to do. If I was really going to turn them away. I leaned back in my chair, looked them both dead in the eye, and said just one word. No. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My mother made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My father's face went through several expressions. Shock, disbelief, then finally rage. He started yelling then, calling me ungrateful, selfish, heartless. Said I owed them for the 14 years they fed and clothed me. That I was spitting on their sacrifice. I sat perfectly still and let him exhaust himself. When he finally ran out of steam, I told him those 14 years didn't erase the 25 I spent alone. That feeding and clothing your child wasn't a favor you could call on later. It was the bare minimum. My mother tried a different approach. She said she understood I was angry, that I had every right to be, but that revenge wouldn't make me feel better, that helping them was the right thing to do, that it would help me heal. I told her I didn't need to heal anymore. I'd done that work years ago, in therapy sessions I'd paid for myself. That this wasn't about revenge or healing. It was about consequences. They'd made a choice 25 years ago to throw away their son like garbage. Now they had to live with the results. My father said I'd regret this. That one day I'd be old and alone and I'd understand what they were going through. I told him the difference was I'd never have children I didn't deserve. That I'd broken the cycle they started. I stood up again and told them our meeting was over. That I had actual work to do. My assistant would show them out. My mother grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. Her grip was weak, desperate. She asked me to at least think about it. To sleep on it. To remember that they were still my parents, no matter what happened. I gently removed her hand and told her that was exactly why the answer was no. Because they were my parents, and they'd failed at the one job that mattered. I said some debts can't be repaid with money, and some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. My father called me a cold-blooded bastard as they left. Said I was dead to him. I told him the feeling was mutual and had been for 25 years. After they left, I stood at my office window, looking out at the city. I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, no relief. Just emptiness where something else might have been. My assistant came in and asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine and asked her to hold my calls for the rest of the day. Update 1. It's been 3 days since my parents left my office. I thought I'd feel something by now, guilt, regret, maybe even satisfaction, but there's just nothing. I've gone through my daily routine on autopilot, and honestly, I'm fine with that. Yesterday, my phone started blowing up with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. Turned out they were relatives I hadn't heard from in decades. An aunt who used to pretend I didn't exist at family gatherings. An uncle who once told me I'd end up in prison. A cousin who borrowed money from me when I was 12 and never paid it back. They all had the same script. My parents were good people who made one mistake. I was being unreasonable. Family forgives family. The house had sentimental value. Didn't I have a heart? I blocked every number. Then the email started. My mother had apparently shared my work email, because suddenly I was getting messages from people claiming to be childhood neighbors, family friends, even my old Little League coach. They all painted the same picture of my parents as salt-of-the-earth people who'd fallen on hard times. Some claimed I was remembering things wrong, that I'd been a difficult kid, that my parents had done their best. I forwarded them all to a folder and never opened it again. This morning, my assistant told me there was a woman in the lobby claiming to be my sister. That stopped me cold. I don't have a sister. I told my assistant to send her up anyway, curiosity getting the better of me. She walked in, maybe 30 years old, nervous energy radiating off her. She introduced herself and explained that our parents had her 6 years after I left. She said they'd told her about me growing up, always calling me their biggest regret. She said she'd begged them to find me for years, but they'd always refused, claiming they were too ashamed. I asked her why she was here. She said because it was the right thing to do. Because she'd grown up in that house, and it meant something to her too. Because she'd only recently learned the full story of why I left. And while she didn't expect me to help our parents, maybe I could help her. She had 3 kids of her own now, and losing the house would mean uprooting them from their school, their friends, everything they knew. I told her I was sorry for her situation, but it wasn't my responsibility. She said she understood, but asked if I'd at least meet her kids. Let them know they had an uncle. She said maybe we could have some kind of relationship, separate from our parents. I considered it for a moment. There was something genuine about her, something that made me think she really did just want a connection. But I also knew that once I opened that door, it would never close. There would always be one more favor, one more family emergency, one more guilt trip. I told her no. She nodded like she'd expected it, thanked me for my time, and left without argument. I respected that. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks. The calls and emails have finally stopped. I assume they've realized I'm not changing my mind. Yesterday, I got a letter delivered to my office by courier. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother and a stack of old photographs. The note was long, rambling, filled with apologies and justifications and pleas. She wrote about how hard things were back then, how my father had been laid off, how they were drowning in debt and didn't know how to cope. She said they took their stress out on me, and by the time they realized what they'd done, I was already gone. She wrote that they'd tried to find me, but I'd disappeared completely. That they'd reported me as a runaway, but the police couldn't locate me. That they'd assumed the worst for years, thinking I was dead. That when they finally accepted I was probably alive somewhere, they were too afraid to keep searching, terrified of what I'd say if they found me. The photographs were of me as a kid. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Little League games. In every single one, I was smiling. I barely recognized that kid. The note ended with one final plea. She said she wasn't asking me to forgive them, just to understand them. That parents are human and make mistakes. That she knew I'd probably throw this letter away, but she had to try one last time. She said she loved me, that she'd always loved me, and that she'd respect my decision whatever it was. I sat there for a long time, staring at those photographs, trying to remember what it felt like to be that kid, trying to find some connection to him. But it was like looking at a stranger. I threw the letter away. Kept the photographs, though. Not sure why. This morning, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my father. His voice was different than it had been in my office, quieter, defeated. He said the bank had foreclosed on the house, that they had 2 weeks to be out. He said he wasn't calling to ask for money anymore, that ship had sailed. He just wanted me to know that he understood why I said no, that he probably would have done the same thing in my position. He said he'd spent the last 2 weeks thinking about that night 25 years ago, that he remembered every word he'd said, just like I did. He said there wasn't a day that went by that he didn't hate himself for it, but that hate didn't change anything, didn't bring me back, didn't fix what he'd broken. He told me he hoped I had a good life, that he was proud of what I'd built, even if he had no right to be, that he was sorry he couldn't be the father I deserved. Then he hung up. I stood there holding my phone, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not enough to change my mind, not enough to make me call him back, but enough to remind me that I was still human. Update 3. It's been a month. I haven't heard from them since that phone call. I assume they've moved out of the house by now, probably into some apartment or rental. Part of me wonders where they ended up. The rest of me knows it's better not to know. Life has gone back to normal. Work, gym, home. The routine that sustained me for years. But something feels different now. There's a weight I can't quite name, sitting in my chest where that emptiness used to be. Last week, I was having dinner with a colleague who's become a friend over the years. He asked me if I had any family, and I said no without thinking. He looked surprised and asked what happened. I gave him the abbreviated version. He listened without judgment, then asked me a question nobody else had. Did saying no make me feel better? I told him I didn't know. He said that was probably my answer. I've been thinking about that conversation ever since, about what I wanted from that moment in my office. I'd imagined it before, over the years. My parents coming back, needing something, and me having the power to deny them. In those fantasies, saying no felt like victory, like justice, like closing a chapter. But the reality was different. Saying no felt like nothing. And maybe that's worse. I'm not saying I made the wrong choice. I don't think I did. They made their bed 25 years ago, and I'm not responsible for the consequences of their actions. But I'm realizing that revenge, or justice, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't actually heal anything. It just creates a different kind of wound. I pulled out those photographs again last night, looked at that smiling kid, and tried to remember what he felt, what he wanted, what he needed. And I realized he would have done anything to hear his parents say they were sorry, to hear that he mattered, to hear that he wasn't dead weight. I got that, in a way, too late and under the worst circumstances, but I got it. I'm not going to call them. I'm not going to help them. That bridge is still burned, and I have no interest in rebuilding it. But I think I'm done carrying this around. Done letting what they did define every choice I make. Maybe that's the real victory. Not making them suffer, but choosing to stop suffering myself. I don't know what happens next. Maybe nothing. Maybe I keep moving forward, building the life I've created, surrounding myself with people who actually give a damn. Maybe years from now I'll get a call that one of them died, and I'll feel nothing, or I'll feel everything. I can't predict it. What I do know is this. I'm not that scared 14-year-old kid anymore. I'm not dead weight. I never was. And I don't need their validation or their apology or their love to know that. I survived them. That's enough.